administration to get all of these organizations and people together and decide who goes where. And it seems like every day or so they would have a new set of rules. So one rule came out. I happened to look, everybody looking at the bulletin board to see what's the law today. And
rules about who goes home.
Rules about, yeah, they devised a point system, and how you accumulate points, length of service, length of time, and for combat people, combat duty, things like that. This was the basic idea. But then other ideas crept in. The main question as far as we were concerned in the 40th Bomb Group, those who were B-29 crews, was who gets to fly home on a B-29. And that's what you wanted to do. You didn't want to ride home in a boat, get on an airplane. Well, there were certain obvious people who were essential. Number one, you needed a pilot, you needed a co-pilot, you needed a flight engineer, you needed a navigator, and probably a crew chief, in case you had maintenance problems. That was about it. And that meant that as far as bombardiers are concerned, we're through dropping bombs, so bombardiers are supernumeraries. Technically, I was a bombardier. I was on the orders squadron bombardier, even though I was flying as many missions as navigator. In fact, most of my missions over the period of time I was there, which was for 18 months, I flew as a navigator. So this thing came out. Bombardiers go by the numbers. Well, I had a pretty good accumulation of numbers, but I didn't know how I was going to shake out as far as getting on an airplane is concerned. So I felt pretty perturbed. I said, well, you got some people here that are technically bombardiers and so on, but have been with this outfit ever since got here, ever since it left Kansas. And I said, I've got 18 months, 26 missions. Doesn't sound right to me. So I called up John Ivory was his name. He was the wing navigator. He had an administrative position. Major Ivory. And I said, John, and I outlined my complaint. And he said, well, I think you got a point, Ray. I think you got a point. Where are you now? I said, I'm out here, squadron operations. Stick around there for a while, will you? Yep, sure will. So, in a little while he called back. And he says, Ray, do you think that you'd have time to get ready to take off on the B-29 at midnight tonight for Uncle Sam, United States? I said, John, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I don't need all that time. Well, I said, yes. He said, well, General Ramey, he was Major General. Roger Ramey was his name. It had nothing to do with Ramey Air Force Base. At that time was the commander of the 58th Wing. And he was going to be flying back. And this was the first flight, the first airplane on what became known as the Sunset Project, transportation of B-29 crews, personnel, by air, back to the United States. I mean, just a lot of airplanes went back to the United States. And this was the first one. And I did have a few little things to take care of as in my capacity as club officer, but I got those taken care of. And, I was there at one time when I needed to. Okay, well, one thing he says, well, now we have a navigator already assigned. Lieutenant so-and-so, forget who it was, and it says, you'll have to go as the, quote, second navigator. I said, John, I don't give a damn whether I'm second navigator or third navigator or what. I'm not interested in that. I get on the airplane. But he said, well, we have to show you on the crew. Okay, show me your second navigator. And so that's what happened. And we took off that night. I think it was at night.
Was Ramey piloting the plane?
No. Got to the airplane that we were going to operate. And all the guns had been removed. And the turrets, there were two turrets. One for the turrets that operated the 4 50 caliber machine guns on top of it, forward, and on top of the B-29, and another one for the 2 that were directly underneath, which, you know, took up quite a lot of space when the those turrets came close together. They had taken all the guns out and they had removed the turrets. And in the place, in that area, they had fastened a chair, a nice, comfortable chair for the general. Obviously, it was for the general, it wasn't for me. So, General Ramey, we all got on board, and that was where the general was. And, I could be wrong in the times when he took off, but I think it was at night he took off, and we were going to fly directly. We had a lot of fuel, an extra Bombardier tank, and we were not going to stop at Kwajalein, which was the usual thing. We were stop en route. We were going to make a direct flight, non-stop flight, hopefully, to Hawaii, to Hickam Air Force Base, or to John Payne Field, which is near here. And that was it. We were just going to go straight through.
It was like one of the first non-stop flights from...
It was a long flight. Well, it wasn't the first one. There was one later that was put together, and it was flown from Bill Towns. This guy I mentioned was our squadron navigator. He was a navigator on that airplane that took off from Tinian, and they tried to fly the Great Circle route over, you know, up the polar region, down across Alaska, Canada. The destination was Washington, D.C. But they were running short of fuel, and so they landed in Chicago.
Your flight was after that one?
My flight was after that one, as I recall. Yes, I think. But this was not to set any sort of records. This was
just to get home.
Get home. So he flew all night. Or if it was at night, then it was at daytime. And then the second night, and this lieutenant was back there at the navigator's table. And of course, I was so-called second navigator. And I go back, and this guy would not talk to me, really. I said, do you mind you take a rest a while? Just why don't you go over there and take a little snooze? I said, I've been snoozing, just let me look at your work. I'll pick it up wherever you are, and I'll wait. You can take a rest. And I'll navigate a while. I'm the first navigator. I'm in charge. He would not get out of he wouldn't let me. So I went, my seat that I had was in the Bombardier seat. I couldn't have pilot the co-pilot right up front. And on at least another occasion, I had the pilot was a lieutenant colonel. Anyway, I can't remember at the moment. So Ray, why don't you go back there and see if you can, you must be exhausted. And I said, well, I'll go back and try it again. So I went back, and he says he's got this thing wired, he's under control, and he declines, and so So that's the situation. I thought perhaps that the colonel could, Burns was his name, could tell him, "No, I want you to," and he's in charge of the aircraft. The general sat back there and dozed most of the time. He was not, he didn't participate in any of his flying the airplane at all.
Did you have some concern that this guy wasn't doing his job? Or?
Well, I know he was doing his job. He's, you know, I couldn't tell without looking over his shoulder and then or asking him to let me look at his charts and his logbook to see what he's doing. The guy should have in hindsight, but again, even though I was a captain and he was a first lieutenant, his status was navigator of that airplane. So I didn't argue. Maybe I should have. But I went back up and sat in the Bombardier's seat and dozed. And it was now pitch dark again. We had flown all day and now it was dark again. And we had to be getting very close to Hawaii. And pretty soon the navigator gave the pilot his estimated time of arrival, ETA, whatever it was, I forget. But it was obviously meant we were going to be landing it that night, which was okay. But that was what the Burns was operating on. This was his estimated time. So he was using that as a guide. And at the appropriate time that he thought was appropriate, we were probably flying around 15,000 feet. That's about where you can get your maximum performance. And started to let down to a couple thousand, maybe 2,500 feet over the Pacific. Although we couldn't see anything, he was letting down gradually, figuring that about the time we've leveled off, we should be seeing something based on the navigator's calculations. But when we leveled off, you couldn't see anything. It was still dark, black as nothing.
No lights from Hawaii.
No lights. So we kept flying along, expecting that something would show up. Some light in the sky, you know, like a city, because the war was over, they were using street lights again. You expect to see something. Some glimmer, glow, indicating a city, which ought to, the big back Pacific ought to stand out clearly. But we didn't see anything. So the ETA ran out. 15 minutes was went by. Half an hour went by. And now the flight engineer became concerned because he talked to the pilot about fuel consumption. Because we obviously were running low. And so about that time, the general roused up and he saw what the situation was, and he wanted to Burns brief. He said, "Well, we're well over the whatever it was, navigator's ETA, and we let down. And we don't see anything." And the general looked around out there, and he says, "I was stationed out here in Hawaii for years," and he says, "I know this country," he says, "I know this area. You know, see that light over there? Right over there. Turn about 45 degrees to the right." He says, "That's Diamond Head." And so Burns returned. And then the general went back and sat down in his seat. So return. So what the general had said was a light. Diamond Head, as you may know, is a prominent point in the Hawaiian Islands, south of, west of Honolulu. So we kept flying towards that night heading for a few minutes. I said, Colonel Burns, I don't see any light. I don't see a thing.
That's what you were telling the pilot.
Yeah, well, he's right here. The general was back there, and he couldn't hear me. I said, I don't see anything. And he'd been looking too. He says, I don't either. He says, I don't see a damn thing. But, meantime, the radio operator was trying his damnedest way. To be let down, you lose. It affects your operation of your radios because you don't get the range. And the major, who was a co-pilot, he was operating the so-called command set. The pilot radio operator was using the master set. We were trying to get, sending out signals, trying to get a response. And from Hawaii, we didn't get any.
You couldn't have climbed back up to get into...
Well, we didn't want to use the gas. We had the fuel problem. Start climbing, you're going to start burning up fuel. So we were sort of stuck where we were. But on this immediate situation, on the south and the light, I said, I don't know what I can't tell what the Navigator did wrong, and it would take me quite a while to figure it out. But there are two aspects to navigating. One is course, and one is time. When do we get there? I said, I think we have to assume that he's made an error in calculating ground speed, calculating speed, and that he's miscalculated how long it would take. And I think if he's at night he's been shooting, he's been shooting star fixes, but he's probably a competent navigator, but he's made a mistake. But to try to figure it out, I think we should go back to the heading that we were on. And he says, well, I think you're right. But the general, sir, the general sitting back there, I said, you're the guy who's making the decisions as far as this flight is concerned, it seems to me. And that's true. He said, well, he did. I said, well, why don't you just take the automatic pilot and just a slow turn, just get back on the heading we were on, and maybe fly a few minutes back towards that, I think compensate for what we've gotten off course, and then get back right on that old heading. So that's what I'm going to do. And that's what he did. So meantime, we kept looking and looking and looking. And I kept thinking, geez, this is a hell of a way to go. Go through all the war, and on the way home, you ditch, and that's the end of it. Ditching, even under the best of conditions, is a very dangerous operation. Ditching at night is even worse. So, finally I just kept looking and confused. Maybe not, it seemed like a long time, but it probably was only a matter of a very few minutes. We began to see a glow directly ahead. A glow. And I didn't say anything at first, but then I asked, you see it? You see it up there? He said, yes. I think that's Honolulu. Can't be anything else. He said, think so? Think so. We couldn't get any radio contact at all. But
because of your altitude? I mean, you're flying low?
Well, I don't know why, but because of probably the altitude, the fact that we were now down to lower altitude made it more difficult. But we were trying to, now the co-pilot, when they're in fairly close, he's got this command set. He wants to talk to the tower, because we want clearance to come in and land. So we kept on flying, and of course now you could see it was a city, and then you could see the land, then you could see the runway lights directly ahead. So majors, he called in on the radio. He says, if this is John Payne Field, turn off, will you flash your runway lights off and on, please? They did. Off. Back on. We are very low on fuel, and we request permission to make a straight-in approach if you know, if okay, flash, do it again. So he turned the lights went off, back on, indicating that not only was that the right location, but there was nobody going to interfere with our making trying to hit the end of the runway.
And you could send a signal but couldn't receive it.
We were transmitting, but we could get nothing back. And so, you know, we just came in, and Burns did a beautiful job. He came in a little bit high. You don't want to get down too low, because if you lose fuel, you're just going to go down. If you come in high, you're keeping you're doing two things. You're keeping the fuel that you have left in the tanks at a fairly level basis, so you don't have a surge. You know what I mean? Which might mean fuel would rush forward, and then you have an engine stall out for lack of fuel. So you keep it as level as you can, with the idea that you get in as close as you can, and then as you advance the control column to put the nose down, even if you lose an engine or two, you've got enough altitude that you could come in, just glide in. You can control the airplane. You got enough height, you got enough speed, so that you can level it off, and you could even land without it. Fortunately, I don't think we lost any power. Maybe we did, but I don't think so. We landed. The engineer did stick the tanks, and he said we had about 10 minutes fuel left for this. So it was kind of a hairy flight. Of course, the general got off, and there were newspaper reporters there, and they're all gathered around. And this was the first flight of the sunset flight.
So you let the general just believe that his directions are what set you on the right course? And
We never talked, never mentioned. That was understood between Burns and myself. If the general wants to think he performed a miracle, that's up to him.
Well, then you went from there back to Washington, right?
Going back from we stayed there, I guess, overnight. Got some sleep. Then took off the next day. We were going to land at our base in California. We didn't which one. We go on from there to Washington. But the colonel said, Captain, you're the navigator for the rest of this mission.
Oh, he did, huh?
Yeah.
I hope that poor fellow didn't feel too bad.
He did. He felt pretty bad about it. He never said anything, but he was down. I didn't really blame him too much. How you can make a mistake. We got back to Washington, and the general lined us all up by the airplane. We had to have our pictures taken and all of that. The general said, no, I don't want, we're going back to the field in California. I'll think of it after a while.
Okay.
Be right out, and I don't want any of you to try to get out of the Army while we're here.
Leanne, why don't you wait about 3 minutes and we'll join you? All right.
Where are they going?
You're just taking the dog for a walk.
Well, said I'm going to be over at, staying over at some hotel. Said we're going to be here about a week, and then we're returning to California. Where'd we leave from when we went to Japan? Begins with a T.
In Travis?
Travis. We're going back to Travis. And so we'll all gather here, and he gave us the date and the time. Have a good time. See you then. Dispersed. I got a hotel. I guess I stayed at EOQ. Bowling. We landed at Bowling. That was in Navigator at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't follow the general's directions. I decided that I couldn't see any reason for going back to California, then back east. So here I am, I'm home, I'm near my home. So I had called Mother and Mom and Dad and told them I was where I was and all of that. So I went out to that air base now in the Washington area. It's an operating.
Andrews Air
Force Base. And inquired around as to who to see about separation from active duty. Got that information. It just took a while to make the right connections. But I succeeded, and it took me a couple of days to complete it all, including a physical examination and computation of accrued leave pay, which was $200, which was quite a pile of money in those days. And got everything worked up, but they said there's one thing we need. We've got to have the document signed by a commander in your organization authorizing your separation. And I said, well, I think maybe I could work that out. So just tell me what you want. So they gave me an idea of what they want. So okay, I'll write it out in Longhand. So that's what I did. And I called the general the next day. And it's getting close to the time when they're going to be returning to California. And I told him, I said, now General Ramey, I know that you had given instructions to all of us. We should not make any effort to get discharged at this point. I said I didn't follow that exactly. I have looked into it and have done all of the administrative work necessary. And you have a navigator on the crew. I was your second navigator, a supernumerary, so to speak. I have prepared a piece of paper, a document. And I said, I'll read it to you, sir, if you care. I read it to him. And he said, well, all right, bring it over here and I'll sign it.
Did you tell him you were close to home and all that anyway?
I told him, give him all the arguments. I said, I'm very close to home. I said, this is Washington. I live in western New York. I plan to go on. I said, my plans are, if all works out all right, to start law school. And I'd like to get that done. And I'm thinking about Cornell University, which is right close to my home. I gave them all the arguments I could think of. And it just seemed to me that it made good sense, if since I'm not needed, and these are my intentions, that I go ahead and stay here close to home. You know, he agreed finally, so I'll bring it over here. I'll sign it. So he's very nice about it. I knocked on this, went over to this hotel, got up to this room, knocked on the door, and he was just getting dressed. He was standing there in his shorts. He says, "Captain," he says, "you got me with my pants down." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, you didn't know that." So he got his pants on, and I stood on the piece of paper, signed it. I shook hands with him, saluted him, and thanked him. Went back out to Andrews, presented the paper to the party, and I completed the process.
You could have just forged his signature, it seems.
That had been illegal. You know that. No, I was prepared. If he said no, he probably could have raised hell. But he didn't. He was very congenial about it. I think the key point is, I said, I'm not really you have all the crew you need, seems to me.
Unfortunately, you came as a second navigator.
I guess so. But,
when was this, in September? About 45?
well, this was, I think, into October of 1945. Sometime in October.
So you'd spent nearly a month on the Antonian, more than a month, since the end of the war.
It was August, it was almost 2 months. We spent on the island. That's the end of my
Well, there was a few.
that phase of my career.
When did you start law school? 40? Was it 45?
I started in March of 46.
March of 46.
Yeah, it was too late. March of 46. Well, I took a trip over to Cornell. Had to get all my transcript, my grades. He interviewed Professor Farnham. He was the acting